Last century, as in the 1990s, if you wanted to hear your new favorite song, you'd grab the CD and seamlessly skip to the track you wanted. It felt luxuriously easy and portable compared to everything before, especially cassette tapes. Then a little invention from Apple came along that literally put hundreds of songs at your fingertips. Launched 20 years ago, the iPod transformed music listening forever. Alan Cross is the host of The Ongoing History of New Music on 102.1 The Edge and is co-author of the new book, The Science of Song, How and Why We Make Music. This year also marks his 40th year on the radio, and we're pleased to welcome him back to our airwaves from the downtown of Ontario's capital city for the long view on all of this. Alan, first of all, my goodness, 40 years. Congratulations. That's a hell of an achievement, my friend. Well done.
Oh, well, thank you. I had no expectations when I started doing this that I would still be doing it 40 years later. But I have no other personal or portable skills, so I guess this is my lot.
Right on. Okay. Well, let's go back not too long ago, a couple of months ago. It was October 23rd, actually, 2001, that the iPod debuted. That anniversary came and that anniversary left without a heck of a lot of fanfare. How come?
Because Apple is a forward-looking company, they don't really tend to spend a lot of time looking on the history of products that really don't matter anymore. I mean, they will forever sing the praises of the first Macintosh computer that came out in 1984, and they will probably talk about, well, I can't think of anything else. The whole idea is that they're moving forward. The iPod enjoyed a very, very big period of popularity. And then the iPhone came along. It basically ate its lunch. It cannibalized most iPod sales. And now there's only one model available, and that's the iPod Touch, which is essentially an iPhone without a phone. And it is, they don't even break out the numbers now when they give their quarterly reports. It's just part of other hardware, I suppose.
Well, we do like to look back on this program, so we are going to look back 20 years ago, and the world got introduced to the iPod with a commercial that, as the kids say, looked a little something like this. Sheldon, if you would. Now, that does bring back some sweet memories there. And let me ask you, they were not holding protests at the corner of Yonge and Bloor demanding this kind of product. So why did Apple launch it in the first place?
Because they wanted to get first mover advantage in the marketplace beyond a couple of South Korean companies. Steve Jobs realized that Apple was in big, big trouble. He had come back to the company in the late 90s, pared down their product line, came out with the brand new, remember the multicolored iMacs that you just pulled out of the box and plugged in and they worked? He believed that the music was a big part of Apple's ecosystem and a part of their DNA. So he had seen a couple of portable MP3 players that had come out of South Korea that didn't do very well and were almost legislated out of existence because there was a very big concern that this was copyright infringement. The record labels really didn't like it. And what ended up happening is that those devices from the South Korean companies were made legal or declared legal based on a 1976 ruling against Disney and Universal, who sued Sony over something called the Betamax VCR. Anyway, so if we were ripping songs for personal use on these devices, it was no different than creating videotapes of programs that you may have missed. So Steve Jobs wanted to get a piece of this action. He honestly believed that music was the way forward. I had a friend who was working as a scriptwriter in Los Angeles at the time, and he got a call from his agent. And he and his writing partner went up to Cupertino, where they met with Steve Jobs in the summer of 2001. And he gave them the whole Steve Jobs presentation about this new thing that was going to allow for 1,000 songs in your pocket. And they were signed to all kinds of non-disclosure agreements, and they were going to make a promotional film about the whole thing that never really happened. But Rob my friend, was really, really intrigued by this whole thing. And what we learned later, that this device was codenamed the P38 Dulcimer. And it was not developed entirely in-house with Apple. They bought some existing hardware. They bought another company that had some of this hardware. But they pushed it all through in about 11 months. So from start to finish, the whole iPod thing happened in 11 months and came out in October 23rd, 2001. And at first, not a lot of people noticed because it was in the fog of 9/11. It was something that was released when everybody was still getting their heads back together after that terrible day. And it sold slowly at first, but everybody who got their hands on it realized that this was a magical thing that worked better than anything else out in the marketplace. And it looked cool. And let's not forget the fact that they all had, these white earbuds or white headphones that, even if you had the thing under your jacket and you walked past and people saw you wearing the white earbuds, they knew you had an iPod. You were on the cutting edge of things.
So that was one thing that made it better than some of the other MP3 players out there. What else made it superior to the competition?
Well, it didn't skip because what Apple had done is gone to Hitachi and bought up their entire inventory of 1.8-inch hard drives, basically cornering the market on those tiny, tiny hard drives. And based using that hardware and a system of what's called nested menus with the software, the thing just worked really, really well. They also had iTunes, of course, which was at first just a CD ripping program. It worked seamlessly with the iPod using a technology called FireWire. So you could load up 1,000 songs in mere minutes, which I had a couple of really early MP3 players. And the quality of the audio was terrible because the capacity, the storage capacity, was so low. And you could only get maybe 30 songs or 35 songs in a decent audio quality. The iPod comes along and you get 1,000 songs in your pocket and they all sound great. And the headphones also helped too. The earbuds helped too because they also sounded very, very good. And it was so easy to use. It was intuitive. I remember playing with the first one. Somebody at work had bought one, and it was like, whoa, this I got it in 10 seconds. That was how remarkable it was.
And at its peak, how much of the market did iPod own?
Pretty much all of it. It's probably 80%, 70%. Everybody needed to have an iPod. And they iterated fairly quickly. There was the traditional one that was the size of a deck of cards, and then the next one, which was the iPod Nano, and that was my entry drug into the whole Apple ecosystem. It was smaller. I think it was 4 gigabytes. It was cheaper, and instead of buying a big one, because I didn't understand the need to have 1,000 songs in my pocket, but 400, yeah, I could live with that. But then they kept getting better. They kept getting bigger. They kept getting more interesting looking. There was, didn't have the iPod Nano. I had the iPod Mini. Mm-hmm. That's right. And then the Nano came along, and then all these other variations until the Touch came out in 2000. I want to say 2006. And I remember seeing the TV commercial for that, thinking, I got to have one of those things now. And I went up the next day and got one.
Now, we have to remember that this is, after all, a gizmo. It is not the actual music. It is a way of playing the music. But, of course, it was so revolutionary that it did change musical trends. How so?
Well, here's the big one. And you can't talk about the iPod without talking about iTunes. iTunes was presented to the record industry by Steve Jobs at a time when everybody was dying because of file trading and piracy. And the record labels could not get together to do anything as a group because that would have violated antitrust rules. So they needed an outside person to come in to provide a storefront digital solution for selling music this way, as a way of meeting customer demand and also as a way of combating privacy. So with iTunes, what you had originally was just something that would rip CDs. Then it became the store. And one of the things about the store was albums were deconstructed into their individual tracks. Not all of them at first, but most of them. So rather than buying an entire album for whatever the price might be, $10.99, $12.99, or so on, you could buy just the songs you wanted. And this was a really big deal because if you remember back to the late 1990s, the big criticism was we were getting albums with one or two good songs on it, and the rest was junk. At the same time, the recorded music industry was phasing out the single. So you couldn't just buy the one song that you wanted, as we had been doing since the dawn of recorded music. So what we saw was Apple, through iTunes, using the iPod, deconstructing or heralding the end of the traditional album, because you no longer had to buy all those records or all those songs you didn't want. You could just buy the songs you wanted, and that has put us on the road to streaming, where it's not about the album anymore; it's about individual songs. That's the biggest thing that iTunes and the iPod did.
I get that, and I guess that is a brave step forward for consumer choice and obviously only paying for what you want. But on the flip side, I wonder if there was a downside to that. Namely, when you bought the album, you might sort of accidentally bump into a song that you didn't know about, but that, as it turns out, you actually love, and it becomes part of the soundtrack of your life. There's less of a chance of that happening now. Isn't that the case?
I totally, completely agree. I mean, earlier this year, we had a situation with Adele, who demanded that Spotify remove the shuffle option, or at least cripple the shuffle option on her album, because the whole thing was meant to be listened to in a certain order as a whole. And that has been the way it's been for a lot of records. I mean, we think about all the concept records that we started getting in the 1960s all the way through to today. That is essentially a little mini opera where you're supposed to follow the libretto and everything has to be unfolded in a specific order. It's really difficult to imagine anybody making an album like Pink Floyd's The Wall, or Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, or even Green Day's American Idiot today, because those are pieces of art that are meant to be consumed as a whole, not by the individual tracks, which is one of the sad things about the demise of the album. I think the album is still the currency of the recorded music industry, and it's still by which so many things are measured, including things like awards programs and so on. But we're starting to really see the album lose currency in favor of individual songs. You know, the hip hop community has got this really figured out. You drip songs out, and you don't wait 2-3 years between albums. Or you put out an EP, or you put out a mixtape. It's all about making sure that your audience is serviced on a regular and timely basis, rather than the old model of, like U2, for example, will put out an album, tour behind it for 4 years, and then disappear for another 2.
Now,
Can't
I know
do that anymore.
LPs, or I guess what we used to call back in the day the long play vinyl record, they have made a comeback. They I guess went away for a while, but they have made a comeback, and they're kind of cool again. But I wonder whether you think the iPod really put to death, if you like, cassettes and CDs and those alternate ways of playing music.
Well, they certainly did, because a cassette, it was bulky. I have a great hate for cassettes. Anybody who romanticizes and fetishizes cassettes today never had to live through the period when they melted on your dashboard, or got completely snarled in your cassette player, or you had to have a box of these things rattling around on the floor of your car. No, thank you. You also had the hassles of fast forwarding and rewinding. You didn't have the ability to skip back and forth. With portable CD players, they had some buffering, so you would, some of them would say that, well, you had a 20-second skip protection on it, which meant that every 20 seconds it would skip. It's essentially what happened. And then vinyl LPs were never portable beyond the 1950s. Back in the 1950s, you could get something called the Highway Hi-Fi, which was actually an under-dash turntable that Chrysler and DeSoto sold for a little while. But vinyl was one of those things where you have to pay attention as you're preparing to listen to it, as you're listening to it, and as you're putting it away. It is, for some people, it is vinyl has become this thing where it's proof of how much inconvenience you're willing to display to show everybody just how much more you love music than everybody else. See, I have to sit at home in front of the stereo listening to it. I have to take it off the shelf. If I want to skip a song, I have to get up and walk across the room. But at the same time, it's this visceral thing. You hold it in your hands. You can look at the liner notes. You can read the lyrics. You can try and figure out what the artwork means.
It's got a beautiful picture on the cover.
Completely. And one of the things that we're finding is that, yes, the older generations are rediscovering vinyl or pulling out their old vinyl, but the largest cohort of people purchasing brand new vinyl records right now is Generation Z. The digital nomads, the kids that grew up with always on internet. And they're finding that this is an interesting addition to the ephemeral, evanescent music that they've enjoyed all their lives. It's something that they can touch and hold and feel and put on a shelf. There's something to be said for somebody who comes into your house and you can say, see how much I love music? I have dedicated 14 linear feet on my wall to my music. You can see it.
We have a guest who comes on this program from time to time named Armine Yalnizyan, who's a wonderful economist, and she always has in her backdrop of her shot a wall full of albums. She must have 10,000 LP albums on the shelf. She's the only one I've seen do this, and it is all, I agree, it makes a heck of a wonderful statement the way she has all that in the backdrop. But you told us earlier that, once the iPhone came along, you kind of didn't really need an iPod anymore. So I guess the question I should ask is the iPod here on its 20th anniversary already obsolete?
It is. If you want a dedicated MP3 player, you can get one really, really cheap that works really, really well. Apple is all about selling iPhones right now because that is the bread and butter of the company. And frankly, you can get an iPhone for, a couple $100, which was far, far less than what you would have to pay for an original iPhone back in 2001. And, that I think it was $599 Canadian, and that's in 2001 dollars. So, get an iPhone and just don't put a SIM card in it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
We've got about 5 minutes and change left, and I want to take advantage of the fact that you are here as one of the truly great radio personalities, observers of the music scene in Canadian music history, in radio history. As we said off the top, 40 years in the business now. Can I just ask you what got you? I know you made this joke about no other, transferable skills to anything else, but the fact of the matter is, you really have found your lane. But how did you start out in that lane and know that it was going to be radio for you in the first place?
My grandmother gave me a transistor radio, a Lloyd's 5 transistor radio for my birthday, my 6th birthday. And my parents didn't ask her to give me one. I didn't ask for one. There's no reason for her to give me one. But yet, this was my first exposure to my own program. I could choose my own programming because up until that point, I could only listen to whatever mom and dad listened to from the radio on the kitchen counter or in the car. With my own little radio, I was free to discover all this audio, all this entertainment, all this news, all this information coming from somewhere, and I found it absolutely magical. And it's from the moment I got that radio, I was inseparable. I would put it on my pillow, listening to music, falling asleep, and my mom would have to come and turn it off and put it on the nightstand. That was really it. I decided that I wanted to do something that brought this weird connection from out of the ether to people. I would pester my dad. We would go tour radio stations. If somebody was doing a remote at a furniture store, I would insist that we stop and watch the guy do his live commercial. It just became something I had in mind from age 6.
That's amazing. And I know it's called 102.1 The Edge today, but I guess when you got there, it was called CFNY, and it was the alternative voice of radio. How'd you end up there?
I had a fight with my program director in Winnipeg. I decided that we weren't getting along, so I started blindly applying to radio stations across the country to get out of that particular position. And the last place I applied to with CFNY, and I didn't know much about the radio station. I didn't know much about the music. I just knew that it was near Toronto. I was based in Brampton at the time, and that I had to get out. And I never heard from any of those other radio stations. And 5 days later, I was hired. And I drove up and got to reception on October 3rd, 1986 at 12 noon, the exact moment that they had the sod turning ceremony for the construction of the Sky Dome. So I am as old as the Sky Dome in Toronto.
Okay. That's pretty cool. You think about that. That probably can't happen today, right?
No, everything has changed so much about media in general, radio specifically. Radio used to be one of the only games in town. Now there's so many other things that people are occupying their time with. But radio, let's be very clear, is still very powerful, very profitable, and very popular. I mean, more than 85% of the Canadian population listens to radio every week. It's still the main thing that we listen to in the car. So it is a very powerful medium still. It does have to evolve with the digital age, but because it's working well and because we have to evolve at the same time as we're doing a good job, it's kind of like changing the wings on an airplane flying at 38,000 feet. We got to do it. It's just going to be tricky.
Yeah. Are you as bullish about the future of AM as you are FM?
AM is disappearing very quickly. It is the oldest of all the radio broadcasting mediums. The issue is that, is there enough space on the FM band for these radios to make the transition over? We would need some regulatory changes to make some of this happen. And we'll see what happens with Bill C-10 when it finally gets introduced, because there's going to probably be some changes to what is allowed and what is not allowed in broadcasting in Canada. And they will be looking at the fate of AM radio stations going forward.
Okay, let me get back to you. So in the 1980s, you get to CFNY. 1993, you create this show, The Ongoing History of New Music. What did you imagine the mission of that show to be when you created it?
I didn't create it. I was forced to do it. We had new management at the time, and they were thinking about changing the radio station over to country. But then they realized that there was, these bands like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and Nirvana and Red Hot Chili Peppers and so on. Okay, we're going to stick with this music, but we really need to educate the audience about what we're doing. So the best way to do that, and back in the day, we had to have all these regulation required programs called foreground music programming. The idea was that we're going to create a 1 hour documentary that's going to explain to our new listeners and our old listeners what this music is all about. So they looked around the staff and they found exactly one person with a history degree, me, and they assigned it to me. And I said, I don't want to do it, because I was happy playing records in the afternoon. I was working from 2 until 6 every day, and it was fantastic. But they said, no, you're going to do it, or we'll, give you a nice little package and you can find something else to do. Now, I had just been married. I had just built a house. I had to do something, so I accepted their offer. And after one program, when they listened to it and saw what I was going to do with it, they just left me alone. And I'm currently writing program number 947.
Unbelievable. It's almost 30 years. You're still going strong. Good for you. We've got about a minute and a half to go here, and I do want to ask you about The Science of Song, How and Why We Make Music. This is a new book that you've got out. What are you trying to achieve with this?
A couple of years ago, I was part of a traveling science museum exhibit called The Science of Rock and Roll. We were at the Ontario Science Centre for about 6 months, and we toured to some other places. And when this was all over, I had all this research, and I thought, well, I just can't let this go. I mean, the exhibit's over, but there's all this good stuff here. And while the exhibit was on, no matter where we went, and we were in Kansas City and Detroit and a bunch of other places, I saw a lot of kids really, really getting involved in the displays. So I thought, well, why don't we turn this into a kids book? And I work for, my main client is Chorus Entertainment. They have a division called Kids Can Press, which is a fantastic children's publishing division. And I said, hey, we want to do this? And they said, okay. So I gave them a couple of manuscripts, and then they gave me some help because I apparently don't really speak child very well. So they translated it a bit, and this is the result. It came out on September the 7th, and apparently is doing quite well.
We wish you well with that. We wish you continued success with The Ongoing History of New Music. We congratulate you on 40 years on the radio. And Alan, we're always delighted when you appear on TVO. Alan Cross, thanks so much again.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.